Hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined by Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success, as well as the presenter of our Wednesday Alpha Anywhere webinars. So today on Alpha Transform, we're going to be going over, we're going to be continuing a topic that we started last week, but we're also here to answer questions. You could submit those questions by typing them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel, or you can send them to us at tfservice, as in transform service, at alphasoftware.com. So last week, we were talking about building advanced inspection applications. And we talked about how cool it is actually to be able to send people out into the field armed with a lot of information to help them get their jobs done. And the example that we did, which I'm going to review right now, involves sending someone out to do inspections on equipment and repairs on equipment. In this case, HVAC, could be anything. So if you can imagine, we have set up a form for our worker. This would all be on one scrolling screen on their phone, but here I've got the top, middle, and bottom here shown here in this display. The top part of the form would have been filled out by the people back at headquarters. So with the service date, the name of the client, the address, and what the client said was the reason for the service request. It's then up to the technician, who then arrives at that address, to go ahead and scan the equipment. And if that equipment is on file, we should be able to save them a bit of time by filling in information about the equipment, including its service history and just the name, the picture. It could also include documentation for example, the product specs or the installation specs could both be in there. So we were showing that as an example last week, and last week we got as far as showing you how the form was put together. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the database. So here's why we need a database in order to make this work. Imagine that they were scanning that code here, and they picked up their mobile device and they've scanned a code. So what's going to happen once that code is right in? That's just going to be a field that's going to be put into a text box on their transform form. But we want it to do a little bit more. So here's what it should do. When you scan the serial number, what we want it to do is look up in a specific table of all serial numbers to see if it exists. And if it is there, to fill in some of the fields on the form for the technician automatically, such as the date that it was first put in service, any service history behind it, as well as the model ID of the item that they just scanned. Now, once they have the model ID, Transform can then take it and look it up in a different table, the models table, we'll call it. So we have two different tables, the equipment table and the models table. And the models table has got information like the name, the brand, the type, the photo, and information about documentation, such as PDF documentation. So that gets filled in, and we display, when I do that. And that displays links to buttons for displaying the PDF links for the documentation. All right, so how do we make this work? Well, to do this, we're going to be putting together something called a SQL Light Database. That is a database type that is supported by Alpha Transform. And in this case, we're using a product called SQL Light Studio, which I'll get into in a minute. In fact, I'll give you a demonstration of it. And we're going to be building out two tables in our database. So we're going to create a database that's simply called equipment. And in equipment, there's going to be two tables. One is called equipment itself, and that's going to have the serial number. That's the key field. That's the thing that we're going to look up on when we hit that scan button. When that's loaded in, if there is a matching record, we're going to know the model ID of the product of the serial number, the date it was put into service, any service notes that are important for the technician to know about. And also, I've included another field here, which we may or may not use, called active. In other words, maybe this thing has been taken out of service, so we no longer want it there, but we don't want to erase any data about it. We may want to keep some information about that in the table. Next up, we've got the models table down here, which is its key field is model ID. And as you can see, that's actually a foreign key relationship from the equipment thing here, the equipment table. So if we know the model ID, we can look up the model, and that'll give us the name, the brand, the type, and various bits of information that are specific to the model, as well as links to documentation, such as the specs PDF and the installation PDF. Now, we're not going to store these, and the photo actually of what that is. Now, we don't store the photo or the PDFs or the install PDFs in this database itself. Those will be kept in separate files. What these fields do is they simply are a pointer to where we can find those files. So they'll basically contain the file name of the photo and the file name of the PDFs. All right, so how do we put this together? We put this together using a product called SQL Light Studio, which you can get at no charge at sqllightstudio.pl. And I'm going to go ahead and demo that for you right now because it's pretty easy to use. And I think if you haven't seen it being used, I will show it to you right now. So this is SQL Light Studio. I'm over here now on my PC. And I have a new database that's open, but I could have created a database by clicking the Add a Database button. So when you open it up, yours is going to be blank. You're not going to have this section here because I've already created this for us. What you're going to do is you're going to click on Add a Database. And when you add a database, it's going to give you a database type. The type it defaults to is SQLite 3, and that's actually the type that you want to use. There it is right there. Then under the file, all you need to do is, if you want to create a brand new one like I did, is you'll basically hit a plus button right here to create a new database file, and it just opens up the standard file dialog box in which you can create the file. It's going to have an extension .db at the end, and I'm going to point that out to you in a minute. And then you can give it a name as you'd like it to appear here in the database lists. Once that's created, you're going to have an entry here like I did, and I called mine equipment. And in equipment, I actually created 2 tables. And you can create tables simply by clicking on the database that you want and then moving back up here into the menu and choosing the Create Table icon, which is right there. And if I click on Create Table, it's going to open up another dialog box. And you'll see it's opened up actually a tab down here. And so here I would give it a name, like this is my table, for example. And then I could just start adding columns to it. So when I do that, by hitting this button right here, the Add Columns. And usually the first part I start out with is the primary key, and that's usually some sort of ID field. And then I can choose the data types. Now, every database is different in terms of data types. SQLite has got some pretty standard data types here. And the ones that we used were the car, in other words, which is similar to a string, a blob, which allows us to store basically not an unlimited, but large amounts of data if we wanted to. So if we don't know exactly how much text we're going to be entering in, a blob is a good choice. We're also using a date field and a few others, and they are right here. So here I've got my 2 things, equipment and models. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. As you'll see, I've got some tabs down here for each one of them. They open up as I start working with these things, including this new table one. I'm going to go ahead and delete that because I don't want that. So close selected window. And it's going to say close anyway. Here we go. So taking a look first at the equipment table. Here's the data that I have in it. I have a serial number. I have 1 record in each of these, by the way. I have its corresponding model ID, the date it was put into service, and some service notes. And I also included 1 to indicate that this is true, that it is in fact an active piece of equipment. The next one I've got down here is the models database. And again, I put in model ID and I put in more information here, like the brand, the type, and all these other things, including the links to the documents that I was talking about before. So when that's all set, I'm ready to go. Now, you might not want to use this interface for actually typing in, especially if you had a long list of model numbers and equipment numbers. This is kind of a drag to use, but you might prefer to use something like Excel or something like that. So you can actually import data directly into these tables using the SQL Light Studio software. And you do that by selecting the table. And actually, I don't even think you have to select the table first, but you do have to select the database that you want to be in. And then you hit this button up here, which is Import Data to Table. And it's going to ask you, oh, it's going to ask you which database you want to be in. In this case, I only have one called equipment. Then it's going to ask which table you want to be in. And you can do that. And I believe it actually lets you create a table on the fly using your imported data, which could be a time saver. And you see that little button there. If you hover over it, it says, if you type table name that doesn't exist, it will be created, which is handy. Then you go over to the next part, and it's going to ask you where you're going to take that information from. You don't have a ton of choices. This isn't like Alpha Anywhere. I think you have two, CSV and regular expression. So you're going to want to have your data in a CSV, comma separated values file. So I basically gave it a file name, and I told it that my first line has got my column names in it so that it knows how to do the field mapping from my CSV file into my SQL Light database. So once that was done, I just hit finish and I imported it, and that's actually how I got the data in here. I first filled it in Excel and then imported it. It was just one line. I probably could have done it either way, but it was just as a proof of concept. All right, so let's review what we've done. We have created a database. In fact, when we're done here, we've created a database, equipment.db, which has got our data in it, containing the serial numbers and the model numbers. And in this folder, I've also collected some other information, which I'm going to want to put onto that Transform app so that it can be accessible offline. One of which is going to be the installation guide. The other is going to be the spec sheet. And the last one is going to be a photo of the equipment that we're working on. This is the one that came from the manufacturer. So we're going to want to put all of those things up onto a place where Alpha Transform can download them and keep them in their file system so that they can be accessed offline. And to do that, we're going to be using Alpha Anywhere, a companion product to Alpha Transform. So I'm going to open up Alpha Anywhere. You can get Alpha Anywhere's Community Edition for free at alphasoftware.com. And when you open it up, you'll be at the Web Projects Control Panel, or after you've created a project, and you go into Tools, and you go down here to More, Transform Utilities, On-Device Data Builder for Transform Applications. Okay, so right here, this is blank, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding some items because I want to basically load up my device with the things that I'm going to need or my technician is going to need when they're on the road. So the first item that I would choose probably with my database. So my item type here is going to be a SQL Light database. And it allows me to create one, but I'm going to use an existing one, the one we just created, say existing. And then the database file name, I just point to where it is, equipment.db, for example. And then you do need to, it says that you can leave this blank and it will fill it in for you. This is the SQL Light database name on the device. In practice, that doesn't actually work that way. So you should give it a name. So I would call this like equipment, and it needs to end with .db. If you don't put that in, it does in fact warn you. So if I click OK, I should get a warning. It says the name of the database must have a DB extension. So I'd put DB on the end of that. DB. All right. Now a version number, which the first time I put it up, I'm going to leave that version number at 1. But if I updated my equipment database, which I may very well may do, I might want to bump that version number up so that Transform knows to get a new, fresher copy when one becomes available. So I'm going to click OK, and now I've added that to my on-device data. And now I can add some other items as well. For example, I can choose a whole folder full of things if I wanted to. In this case, I can also just do them one at a time. So the file I'm going to grab is this PDF. So I've got that. And I need to have a target folder. I thought I could leave that blank, but maybe I can't. I'm going to call this documents, and I'll just know to reference that later on when I'm putting together, when I'm finishing the form to start loading these up. All right, moving on, I basically would fill this up, and when I'm done and I could save this, I can end up generating a manifest file. So basically, I filled up all of this on-device data here, and I'm now ready to get this over into Transform. But to do that, I need to put it up on a server. I need to put it someplace where Transform is going to be able to find it. And by default, the easiest way to do that is to put it on Amazon's S3 service, which is a inexpensive, well, practically free service from Amazon if you're doing small amounts of work that you could find over at AWS, also known as Amazon Web Services. Now, setting that up, if you know how to do it, just takes a couple minutes. If you don't know how to do it, it takes several hours and a lot of Googling. I figured out how to do it for you, fortunately, and that's actually what we're going to be tackling next week, is how to set up our S3 bucket. So as of today, though, we've got our SQLite database set up, we've got our files ready to go, and we are ready to move them up to a place where Transform can get them. So I hope you join me next time as we set up our S3 bucket and we continue on with the process of building out our advanced inspection application. Okay, are there any questions? Take a look. There do not appear to be. Well, again, you could always send questions to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. I want to thank everyone for joining me. Thanks, Sarah, for being here for backup. And we hope to see you at our next Transform Tuesday. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.